The frost came early to Wyoming territory in the winter of 1876, catching travelers unprepared and turning the vast plains into a merciless white expanse that swallowed sound and warmth with equal hunger. Clara Bennett felt the cold seeping through every layer of her borrowed coat as her horse stumbled again, its breath coming in ragged clouds that vanished into the howling wind, and she knew with a sinking certainty that she would not make it to the next town before nightfall claimed what little remained of the day. She had left Cheyenne 3 days ago with a merchant caravan heading north to Montana, carrying with her everything she owned in 2 small bags and a heart full of desperate hope. Her aunt in Helena had written promising work at her boarding house, a chance for Clara to start fresh after the fever took her parents the previous spring. But the caravan had been attacked by bandits 2 days into the journey, scattering the travelers and leaving Clara alone with a horse that was not truly hers and supplies that would not last another week. The bandits had taken most of the goods but left the people alive, perhaps showing more mercy than the winter would. The wind bit at her exposed cheeks, making her eyes water until tears froze on her lashes. She could no longer feel her toes in her boots, and her fingers had gone from painful to numb inside her thin gloves. The horse beneath her shuddered with exhaustion, its legs trembling as it pushed through snow that reached past its knees. Clara leaned forward, whispering encouragement she did not feel, knowing that if the animal gave out she would have no choice but to walk, and walking meant death in this cold. The sun hung low on the horizon, a pale disk that offered no warmth, only the promise that darkness would soon make everything worse. Clara scanned the white landscape for any sign of shelter, but the blizzard had erased all landmarks, turning the world into an endless void where sky and ground merged into one colorless nothing. Her breath came shallow now, not from exertion but from the cold that seemed to press against her chest, making each inhale an effort. Then, through the swirling snow, she saw it, a dark shape that might have been a rock formation or a trick of her freezing mind. She urged her horse toward it, praying it was real, praying it was shelter. The animal responded with the last of its strength, pushing through the drifts as the shape grew more distinct. Not rocks, but a small outcropping with an overhang, and beneath it, the unmistakable form of a man crouched beside a struggling fire. Clara's horse stumbled into the sheltered space, and the man looked up sharply, his hand moving to the gun at his hip before he registered that she was alone and barely conscious in the saddle. He rose quickly, a tall figure wrapped in a heavy coat, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat crusted with ice. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough from the cold but steady. He reached up to help her down, and Clara found she could not make her legs work properly. She half fell into his arms, her body stiff and unresponsive. "How long have you been out here?" "Since morning," Clara managed through chattering teeth. "Lost the caravan, had to keep moving." The man cursed softly and guided her to sit near the fire, which was indeed small and struggling against the wind that still managed to eddy into their shelter. He turned his attention to her horse, quickly removing the saddle and rubbing the animal down with handfuls of snow before covering it with a blanket from his own pack. Clara watched through blurred vision, recognizing the practiced efficiency of someone who knew how to survive in harsh country. When he had secured the horse alongside his own larger mount, he returned to Clara and crouched before her, studying her face with concern. She could see him better now in the firelight. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar and eyes that were a startling blue even in the dim light. His face was lean and weathered, marked by sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. There was something solid about him, something that spoke of reliability and strength. "I am going to check your hands and feet," he said, already reaching for her boots. "You have got frostbite starting. We need to warm you slowly or you will lose fingers and toes." Clara nodded, too cold and tired to protest. She watched as he removed her boots with careful gentleness, his brow furrowing at what he saw. Her stockings were soaked through, her toes an alarming white. He set to work immediately, warming his own hands before cupping them around her feet, his touch careful and impersonal but somehow comforting. "What is your name?" he asked, clearly trying to keep her talking and alert. "Clara Bennett. I was heading to Montana. You, Jack Morrison." "I am a horse wrangler, was taking some stock to a ranch north of here when this storm came up." He continued working on her feet, gradually bringing feeling back in a way that made her gasp with pain. "There now, I know it hurts, but that means the blood is moving again. That is good." Clara bit her lip against the burning sensation as circulation returned. Jack moved onto her hands, removing her useless gloves and enclosing her fingers in his own warm palms. His hands were large and calloused, marked by hard work, but his touch remained gentle. She found herself studying his face as he concentrated on his task, noting the small scar above his left eyebrow and the lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often despite the hardness of his life. "You are lucky I decided to stop here," Jack said after a while. "I was debating pushing on, but my horses needed rest, and that old mare of mine has good sense about storms. When she started refusing to go further, I listened." "I am grateful you did," Clara said, her voice stronger now as warmth began to creep back into her core. "I do not think I would have lasted much longer." Jack met her eyes and nodded soberly. "This storm is going to get worse before it gets better. We will be here at least through the night, maybe longer. Do you have supplies?" Clara shook her head. "Some, not much. The bandits took most everything." "Bandits?" Jack's expression darkened. "When?" 2 days ago, they hit our caravan, took the trade goods and supplies, scattered us. I have been trying to reach the next town, but I got turned around in the snow." Jack stood and moved to his saddle bags, pulling out strips of dried meat and hardtack. "Well, you are safe now. I have enough for both of us for a few days if we are careful. The horses can survive on what grass they can paw up and some oats I have left." He handed her some of the food and a canteen of water. "Eat slowly. Your stomach will not thank you if you rush it." Clara accepted the food gratefully, forcing herself to take small bites even though her body screamed for more. Jack added more wood to the fire, building it up now that he had another person to share warmth with. The outcropping they sheltered under was not large, perhaps 8 feet deep and 12 feet wide. But the rock above them kept the worst of the snow off and reflected the heat of the fire back toward them. As the fire grew stronger and Clara felt more human, she became aware of how close they were sitting. The space forced an intimacy that would have been improper under normal circumstances, but propriety meant nothing when survival was at stake. Jack seemed aware of it too, maintaining a respectful distance even as he worked to make their shelter more secure. "Where were you coming from?" Clara asked, wanting to fill the silence with something other than the howl of the wind. "Colorado." "I was working on a ranch down there, but the owner died and his son did not want to keep me on. Heard there was work up north, good money for someone who knows horses." Jack poked at the fire, sending sparks swirling up into the gathering darkness. "Been on the trail about a week. Was hoping to be in Montana before the worst of winter hit, but seems I miscalculated." "We both did," Clara said with a weak smile. "Though I suppose we are lucky to have miscalculated together rather than separately." Jack glanced at her, and something that might have been a smile tugged at his mouth. "I suppose that is one way to look at it, though I am sorry for the circumstances that brought you here." They fell quiet again, and Clara felt exhaustion pulling at her. The warmth of the fire and the food in her stomach combined with the aftermath of her terror to make her eyes heavy. She caught herself nodding forward and jerked awake, afraid of what might happen if she let her guard down completely with a stranger. Jack noticed. "You should sleep." "You are safe, I promise. I will keep the fire going and watch for any trouble." "I cannot ask you to do that," Clara protested, though her body betrayed her with another wave of exhaustion. "You are not asking, I am offering." Jack stood and moved to his saddle, pulling out a thick wool blanket. He brought it to her and draped it over her shoulders. "Here, this will help." The blanket was heavy and warm, still carrying heat from where it had been packed. Clara pulled it tight around herself, grateful beyond words. But even with the blanket and the fire, she could feel the cold creeping in as the temperature continued to drop with the setting sun. The wind had picked up, driving snow into their shelter and making the fire dance and flicker dangerously. Jack frowned, clearly recognizing the same problem. He looked at his remaining blanket, then at Clara, and she saw him calculating. "This is going to be a cold night," he said finally. "Colder than either of us is prepared for individually." Clara understood what he was suggesting and felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "We are strangers. We are, and in town what I am about to suggest would be scandalous." Jack met her eyes directly, his expression serious. "But out here, scandal does not matter much if we are dead from cold. Sharing body heat might make the difference between seeing morning and freezing before dawn." He was right, and Clara knew it. She had heard stories of travelers freezing to death in winter storms, found later sitting beside their fires, the cold having stolen their lives despite their best efforts. Pride and propriety were luxuries neither of them could afford. "What do you propose?" she asked quietly. "We sit close, share the blankets between us, keep each other warm through the night. Nothing improper," he added quickly. "Just survival." Clara nodded slowly. "All right, for survival." Jack gathered his own blanket and arranged a space near the fire where they could sit with their backs against the rock wall. He sat first, leaving room beside him, and Clara moved to join him, acutely aware of every movement, every breath. She settled beside him, and Jack carefully arranged both blankets over them, tucking the edges in to trap warmth. Even through layers of clothing, she could feel his solid presence beside her, could feel the warmth radiating from him. It was different from the fire, more immediate and somehow more comforting. Jack kept his arms carefully at his sides, maintaining as much propriety as the situation allowed. "Try to sleep," he said softly. "I will wake you in a few hours and you can take a turn watching the fire." "You need rest too," Clara pointed out. "I will rest. Just not deeply. Out here you learn to sleep light." Clara leaned her head back against the rock, feeling the exhaustion pulling at her again. The warmth of the blankets and Jack's presence beside her made her feel safer than she had in days. Her eyes drifted closed, and she let herself sink into sleep. She woke sometime in the deepest part of night to find herself shivering violently despite the blankets. The fire had burned down to coals, and the cold was a living thing pressing in from all sides. Beside her she could feel Jack shaking as well, his breathing harsh in the frozen air. "Jack," she whispered through chattering teeth. "I am awake," he replied, his voice tight. "It is too cold. The fire is not enough." Clara could see her breath frosting in the air, could feel ice forming on the inside of the blankets where their breath had condensed. This was the killing cold, the kind that stole life while people slept. Fear shot through her, burning away the last of her drowsiness. "What do we do?" she asked. Jack was quiet for a moment, and she could almost hear him thinking, calculating their chances. Then he spoke, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Take my blanket." "What? No, I cannot take my blanket," Jack insisted, already starting to shift the coverings. "You are smaller, you will freeze faster. If one of us is going to make it, it should be—" "No." Clara's hand shot out, gripping his arm through the layers of cloth. "No, we both make it or neither of us does." "Clara, be reasonable." She pulled him closer, her fear making her bold. "We share it. Both blankets around both of us, as close as we can bear. That is how we survive this." Jack hesitated, and she could feel the conflict in him, the war between propriety and survival. Then he nodded, and his arm came around her shoulders, pulling her tight against his side. Clara wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing close, seeking and sharing warmth with an urgency born of desperation. "Forgive me," Jack murmured as he held her. "There is nothing to forgive," Clara replied, her face pressed against his chest. "You are saving my life." "We are saving each other," he corrected. and she felt his other arm come around her, holding her securely as he rearranged the blankets to cover them both completely. The difference was immediate. With their bodies pressed together and the blankets sealed tight around them, warmth began to build in the small space they shared. Clara could feel Jack's heart beating strong and steady beneath her ear, could feel the rise and fall of his breathing. Her own shivers gradually subsided as heat spread through her limbs. "Better," Jack asked after a while. "Better," Clara confirmed. "Thank you." "Nothing to thank, you were right. This was the only way." They lay like that through the longest hours of the night, holding each other while the storm raged outside their small shelter. Clara found herself acutely aware of everything about Jack, the solid strength of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his hand rested carefully but protectively against her back. It should have been awkward, should have been uncomfortable, but instead it felt oddly right, as if her body had found a place it was meant to fit. "Tell me about Montana," Jack said quietly, his voice rumbling through his chest. "What were you going to do there?" Clara smiled in the darkness. "My aunt runs a boarding house in Helena. She wrote that she could use help, that there was opportunity there for someone willing to work hard. After my parents died, there was nothing keeping me in Cheyenne. The house was sold to pay debts, and I had no other family nearby." Montana seemed like a fresh start. "I am sorry about your parents," Jack said softly. "Thank you. The fever took them within days of each other last spring. It was fast, at least. They did not suffer long." Clara paused, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. "I miss them terribly, but I know they would want me to move forward to build a life." "They raised a strong daughter," Jack observed. "Not many women would have survived what you have been through these past days. I am not sure I would have without your help. You made it to my fire." "That took strength and will." Jack shifted slightly, settling them more comfortably. "My own parents died when I was 15. Cholera outbreaks swept through our town in Missouri. I have been on my own since then, working ranches, learning what I could. Always moving, never staying long enough to put down roots." "Does that bother you, never having a home?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. I see men with wives and children with land of their own, and I wonder what that would be like. But I always figured that kind of life was not for someone like me, someone who moves with the seasons and never has much more than what fits in a saddle bag." "Maybe you just have not found the right place to stop yet," Clara suggested. "Maybe," Jack agreed, his voice thoughtful. "What about you? Did you leave anyone special behind in Cheyenne?" Clara shook her head against his chest. "No. There was a boy once, the son of a merchant. We were friendly, but when my parents died and I had no prospects, his interest faded quickly. I learned then that some people only care about what you can offer them, not who you are." "His loss," Jack said firmly. "Any man who would turn away from you because of circumstances beyond your control is not worth your time." The certainty in his voice made something warm bloom in Clara's chest, something that had nothing to do with shared body heat. She tilted her head to look up at him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "You say that with confidence for someone who has known me less than a day. I have known you long enough to see that you are brave and resourceful, long enough to see that you keep going when many would have given up. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Jack's arm tightened slightly around her. "Character is what matters in the end, the rest is just window dressing." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, surprised by how much his words meant to her. "Thank you for that, just speaking truth." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now, the quiet of two people who had found an unexpected connection in desperate circumstances. Clara let her eyes close, lulled by the warmth and the steady beat of Jack's heart. When she woke again, pale light was filtering into their shelter and the wind had finally died down. Jack was already awake, had probably been awake for some time. He smiled when he saw her eyes open. "Good morning. We made it." Clara sat up slowly, immediately missing the warmth of his embrace, but knowing they needed to assess their situation. She looked out at the world beyond their shelter and gasped. The storm had transformed everything into a pristine white wilderness, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Snow had drifted as high as her waist in places, and more still clung to the air, though the worst had clearly passed. "How deep is it?" she asked. "Deep enough that we are not going anywhere today," Jack replied, already moving to rebuild the fire. "Maybe not tomorrow either. The horses cannot move through this, and neither can we. We will need to wait for it to settle and pack down, or for a thaw." Clara's stomach sank. "How long will that take?" "Hard to say. Could be a few days, could be a week." Jack must have seen her distress because he added, "We will be fine. We have shelter, fire, and enough food if we are careful. The horses can dig for grass under the snow. It is not comfortable, but we will survive." "I am sorry," Clara said quietly. "If you had not stopped to help me, you would not be trapped here." Jack looked up from the fire, his expression serious. "If I had not stopped here, I would likely be dead, frozen in a snowdrift somewhere with my horses, and you would be dead too. This way we are both alive and together. I would say that makes us both lucky." His words made sense, but Clara still felt the weight of guilt. Jack seemed to sense it because he stood and came to crouch in front of her, waiting until she met his eyes. "Listen to me, Clara. What happened is not anyone's fault. It is just the way things worked out. We make the best of it and move forward. That is all we can do." She nodded slowly, accepting his words. "All right. What do we need to do? First, we eat. Then we take stock of what we have and plan accordingly. We also need to make sure the horses stay healthy. After that, we wait and try to stay warm." Jack's mouth quirked. "I am afraid it might mean more time sharing blankets." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks but met his eyes steadily. "I think we can manage that." The day passed slowly, measured in small tasks and careful conservation of energy. Jack checked on the horses multiple times, brushing snow off their backs and making sure they had access to water melted from snow. Clara organized their supplies, rationing out the food and taking inventory of what else they had. The numbers were not encouraging, but they could make it work if the weather cleared within a week. As afternoon faded toward evening, they sat together by the fire, watching the light change across the snow. Clara found herself studying Jack when she thought he was not looking, noting the careful way he moved, the thoughtfulness in his eyes, the quiet competence that marked everything he did. He caught her watching once and smiled, and she felt that same warm flutter in her chest. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Clara considered lying, then decided there had been too much honesty between them already to start hiding now. "I am thinking that I am grateful the storm brought me to your fire and not someone else's. I am thinking that I feel safer with you than I have felt in a long time, and I am thinking that is probably foolish, given that I hardly know you." Jack's smile faded into something more serious, more intent. "It is not foolish. I feel it too, this connection between us. I felt it last night when you refused to let me give you both blankets, when you insisted we survive together." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I have met a lot of people in my travels, Clara. Most I forget as soon as I move on. I do not think I am going to forget you." "I am not going to forget you either," Clara said softly. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Clara could not quite name but felt all the way through her body. Then Jack reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, his hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her skin. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. "Yes." Jack leaned in slowly, his eyes never leaving hers until the last moment when his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning. Clara's eyes fluttered closed as she leaned into it, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. The kiss deepened gradually, becoming something more than gentle, something that spoke of the connection growing between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Jack rested his forehead against hers, his hand still cradling her face. "I should apologize for that, but I cannot bring myself to." "Good," Clara said, surprising herself with her boldness, "because I do not want your apology." They kissed again, Longer this time, and when they finally settled for the night, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the shared blankets, it felt natural rather than necessary. Clara lay with her head on Jack's shoulder, his arm around her, and felt a contentment she had not known was possible. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their lives, their dreams, their fears. Clara learned that Jack wanted to own his own ranch someday, to breed horses and build something lasting. Jack learned that Clara had always wanted to travel, to see mountains and oceans and everything in between. Maybe we could do both, Jack suggested quietly. Build something lasting in a place worth seeing. Maybe we could, Clara agreed, her heart full of possibilities. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for tending the horses and gathering wood from the sparse trees nearby. Afternoons were for conserving warmth and sharing stories. Evenings were for sitting close by the fire, for stolen kisses and whispered conversations that lasted until sleep claimed them. The storm returned twice more, though never as severely as that first night, and each time Jack and Clara held each other through the worst of it. On the fifth day, the sun finally emerged fully, bright and warming. The snow began to melt, and Jack ventured out further from their shelter to scout the surrounding area. He returned with good news. There was a valley to the east where the snow was less deep, and beyond it, he had seen smoke that suggested a town or settlement. "We could make it in a day, maybe two if we are careful," he said, his expression torn between relief and something else Clara could not quite read. "That is wonderful," Clara said, trying to match his enthusiasm even as her heart sank. Reaching civilization meant going their separate ways. Jack would continue north to Montana and his job. She would need to figure out how to complete her journey to her aunt's boarding house. The thought of parting from him felt like a physical ache. They left the next morning, the horses moving slowly but steadily through the snow. Jack rode ahead, breaking trail while Clara followed on her borrowed mount. They spoke little, both lost in their own thoughts. When they stopped to rest the horses, Jack helped Clara down from her saddle and held her longer than necessary. "Clara," he started, then seemed to lose his words. "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." "Come with me," Jack said suddenly, urgently. "To Montana, forget the boarding house, come with me." Clara's breath caught. "Jack, I cannot, I have nothing to offer. My aunt is expecting me, I have no money, no prospects." "You are talking about—" "I am talking about not wanting to let you go," Jack interrupted. "I am talking about the fact that I have felt more alive these past 5 days with you than I have in years of wandering alone. I am talking about the fact that I think I am falling in love with you, Clara Bennett, and I do not care if that is crazy or too fast or improper. It is the truth." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, hot against her cold skin. "I am falling in love with you too, but Jack, be reasonable. We met less than a week ago. We do not know if what we feel is real or just the circumstances." "I know," Jack said firmly. "I know the difference between gratitude and affection born of shared danger and what I feel for you. This is real, Clara, as real as anything I have ever known. My aunt is expecting me. She is depending on me to help with the boarding house. Then we will go to Helena together. I will find work there, prove to you that I am serious, that I can provide. Give me a chance, Clara. Give us a chance." Clara looked into his eyes, those startling blue eyes that had been the first thing she had truly noticed about him, and saw nothing but sincerity and hope. She thought about returning to Cheyenne alone, about starting over as a hired girl in her aunt's boarding house, about the life of polite spinsterhood that likely awaited her. Then she thought about the past 5 days, about the feeling of rightness when Jack held her, about the way they fit together like pieces of a puzzle she had not known was incomplete. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will give us a chance." Jack's face lit up with a smile that made him look years younger. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, heedless of the horses or the snow or anything else. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "We should probably get married," Jack said practically. "Before we reach town, so there is no question about propriety or your reputation," Clara laughed, giddy with joy and possibility. Are you proposing to me, Jack Morrison? I am, badly apparently, but yes. Jack took both her hands in his. Clara Bennett, I do not have a ring or a prepared speech. I do not have much of anything except a couple of horses and the clothes on my back. But I have a strong back and willing hands, and I swear to you that I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. Will you marry me? Yes, Clara said, her voice strong and sure. Yes, I will marry you. They reached the settlement 2 days later, a small mining town called Silver Creek that clung to the side of a mountain. The people there were surprised to see travelers arriving in the aftermath of such a storm, but welcomed them with frontier hospitality. Jack asked immediately about a preacher, and they were directed to a small church at the edge of town where a circuit minister happened to be passing through. Reverend Thomas was an elderly man with kind eyes who asked no questions when Jack and Clara appeared at his door requesting to be married immediately. He called in 2 townsfolk to serve as witnesses, a matronly woman named Mrs. Brennan and her husband George, and performed the ceremony in the small church with its rough-hewn pews and simple cross. Clara wore her only dress, brushed clean of trail dust as best she could manage, with wildflowers Mrs. Brennan had dried and saved from summer tucked into her hair. Jack stood tall beside her in his cleanest shirt, his hat held respectfully in his hands. When the Reverend asked if he took Clara to be his lawfully wedded wife, Jack's "I do" rang out strong and clear. When it was Clara's turn, she met Jack's eyes and spoke her vow with all the certainty in her heart. They had no ring, so Jack took a piece of leather cord from his saddle bag and tied it gently around Clara's finger as a placeholder, promising to replace it with proper gold when he could afford it. Clara told him it was perfect as it was. Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, and Jack kissed his new bride with a tenderness that made Mrs. Brennan tear up. George Brennan clapped Jack on the back and declared that drinks were in order, but the newlyweds declined politely. They had miles yet to travel and a life to build. They spent their wedding night in a small room at Silver Creek's only boarding house, a far cry from the rock shelter where they had first held each other, but no less precious for that. Jack was gentle and patient with Clara, and what happened between them in that small room was an extension of everything that had been building since that first night in the snow, a physical expression of the love and trust they had found in each other. Afterward, Clara lay in Jack's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat just as she had during the storm. "No regrets?" Jack asked softly, his fingers trailing through her hair. "Not a single one," Clara assured him. "You? Only that I did not meet you sooner." Jack pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "We should wire your aunt and Helena, let her know you are safe and married. She will worry otherwise." "We will send a telegram in the morning," Clara agreed. "Jack, where will we go now?" "Helena, like we planned. I will find work there, save money. Eventually, I want to find land, start that horse ranch I told you about. It will not be easy or quick, but we will get there together." "Together," Clara echoed, loving the sound of the word. They reached Helena 3 weeks later, having taken their time on the journey, stopping at settlements along the way where Jack could pick up odd jobs to add to their meager funds. Clara's Aunt Ruth was shocked to receive them, having gotten the telegram explaining Clara's marriage but not quite believing it until her niece appeared on her doorstep with a husband in tow. Ruth Bennett was a formidable woman in her 50s, tall and stern-faced, who ran her boarding house with strict efficiency. She looked Jack up and down with a critical eye that made him stand a little straighter under the scrutiny. "So you are the man who married my niece in the wilderness," she said flatly. "Yes, ma'am," Jack replied respectfully. "I know it seems sudden, but I love Clara and I will do right by her." Ruth's expression softened slightly. "Clara's mother was my sister. I loved her dearly, and I promised her when she was dying that I would look after Clara if anything happened. I take that promise seriously, young man." "As you should, ma'am. I would think less of you if you did not." Ruth studied him a moment longer, then nodded once, sharply. You can stay here while you look for work. I will not charge you rent, but you will earn your keep. I need repairs done around the place and someone strong enough to handle the heavy work." "I appreciate that, ma'am. Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. I work my people hard." But there was a glint of humor in Ruth's eyes that suggested she was not quite as stern as she pretended. Jack proved himself over the following weeks, tackling every task Ruth set him with cheerful determination. He fixed a sagging porch, replaced rotted floorboards, repaired the roof where it leaked, and chopped enough wood to see the boarding house through the winter. In his spare time, he found work at a stable in town, exercising horses and helping with the shoeing. Clara worked alongside her aunt, learning the business of running a boarding house, cooking meals for the residents and keeping rooms clean. In the evenings, Jack and Clara would retreat to their small room under the eaves, a space barely large enough for a bed and a small dresser, but theirs. They would lie together in the narrow bed, talking about their days and their dreams for the future. Jack was saving every penny he could, determined to have enough for a down payment on land by spring. Winter in Helena was cold but bearable, nothing like the killing frost that had brought them together. Clara sometimes thought about that night under the rock overhang, about how close they had both come to dying, and marveled at the path that had led her to this moment. She had left Cheyenne expecting loneliness and hard work in a strange city. Instead, she had found love and partnership and a future brighter than anything she had imagined. Christmas came, and Ruth surprised them both by having a gold ring made for Clara, a simple band that fit perfectly on her finger beside the leather cord Jack had tied there months ago. Clara cried and hugged her aunt, who patted her back awkwardly and muttered something about not getting sentimental. Jack shook Ruth's hand and promised to pay her back, but Ruth waved him off. "Consider it a wedding gift," she said gruffly. "Every bride deserves a proper ring." Clara kept the leather cord even after the gold ring was in place, tucking it carefully into a small box where she kept her few treasures. It represented everything important to her: survival, trust, and the moment she had chosen to believe in love even when logic said it was too fast, too dangerous, too improbable. Spring arrived with a rush of meltwater and green growth, and Jack came home one evening with news. "I found it," he said, his eyes alight with excitement. "Land. Good land with water and grass about 15 miles from here. The man who owns it is heading back east and wants to sell. It is not large, maybe 160 acres, but it is enough to start with. Can we afford it?" Clara asked, her heart racing. "Just barely. I have been talking to the bank about a loan for the rest. It will be tight, Clara. We will have to build everything ourselves, and it will be years before we can make it truly profitable. But it is possible, if you are willing to take the risk with me." Clara thought about the girl she had been 6 months ago, alone and afraid, fighting through a blizzard with no guarantee of survival. She thought about the man who had shared his fire and his warmth, who had refused to let either of them give up. She thought about the life they had built together in these months, the partnership and love that had only grown stronger with time. "I am willing," she said firmly. "Let us do it." They spent the next month finalizing the purchase, signing papers at the bank, and preparing for the move. Ruth pretended to be unmoved by their departure, but Clara caught her aunt wiping tears away when she thought no one was looking. On their last night in the boarding house, Ruth pulled Clara aside. "Your mother would be proud of you," Ruth said quietly. "You have grown into a fine woman and you chose a good man. Be happy, Clara." "Thank you, Aunt Ruth, for everything, for giving us a chance, for believing in us." "Believing in you was never hard," Ruth replied. "Now go build that life you have been dreaming about." The land Jack had purchased was everything he had promised and more. It sat in a valley with a creek running through it, surrounded by hills that would shelter their eventual buildings from the worst of the winter winds. There was no house yet, no barn, just open land and possibility. They camped in a tent that first month while Jack began felling trees and preparing lumber for building. Clara worked alongside him, learning to handle an axe and a saw, her hands blistering and healing and hardening. They worked from dawn to dusk, breaking only for meals and rest. It was the hardest physical labor Clara had ever done, but she found joy in it, in the tangible progress they made each day, in the way the skeleton of their house took shape board by board. Neighbors from surrounding homesteads came to help with the barn raising, a tradition of the frontier where everyone pitched in knowing they would need the same help someday. Clara cooked for the volunteers, preparing vast quantities of stew and biscuits, while Jack worked alongside the men to raise the frame. By sunset, the barn stood complete, and their helpers stayed for an impromptu celebration with music and dancing. Jack pulled Clara into a reel, spinning her around until she was breathless and laughing. "What do you think, Mrs. Morrison? Do you regret leaving the boarding house for this?" Clara looked around at their land, at the barn standing tall, at the foundation of the house they would build next, at the faces of their new neighbors who were becoming friends. "Not for a second," she said honestly. "This is exactly where I want to be." The house was finished by midsummer, a sturdy two-room cabin with a loft that would eventually be divided into bedrooms when they needed them. It was simple but well built, with a good fireplace and windows that let in light. Clara hung curtains she had sewn herself and placed wildflowers on the rough wooden table Jack had made. It was not much, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and paid for with their own sweat and determination. Jack began building up his horse stock, trading work for animals and buying a few good breeding mares when he could afford them. He had an eye for quality and a patience with the animals that served him well. Word began to spread that Jack Morrison had good horses for sale at fair prices, and slowly, business came to them. Clara planted a garden, growing vegetables that supplemented their diet and could be preserved for winter. She learned to make cheese and butter, to preserve meat, to do all the things necessary for a self-sufficient homestead. It was harder than working in the boarding house, but infinitely more satisfying. That first autumn on their own land, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Jack one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment, then broke into a grin so wide it made her laugh. "A baby," he said, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Clara confirmed, her own joy bubbling up. "In the spring, I think." Jack picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down, looking worried. "Should I be doing that? Are you all right? Do you need to sit down?" Clara laughed at his concern. "I am fine, Jack. Pregnant women are not made of glass. But yes, I think we should sit down and talk about what we need to do before the baby comes." They spent the evening making plans, deciding that the loft would need to be properly finished and divided to give the baby a space of its own. Jack insisted that they would need more supplies, more food stored, more of everything to make sure Clara and the child would be safe and provided for. Clara listened to his plans with amusement and love, recognizing his nervous excitement for what it was. "We will be fine," she assured him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. We will manage." "I know. I just want everything to be perfect for you and for our child." "It already is perfect," Clara said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We have each other, we have our land, and now we will have a family. What more could we need?" Winter came again, their second since the storm that had brought them together. This time they faced it from the warmth and security of their own home, with a full larder and solid walls around them. Clara's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she found herself tiring more easily as the baby grew. Jack took over more of the heavy work, insisting she rest whenever possible. On quiet evenings, they would sit by the fire, Clara knitting small garments while Jack worked on a cradle he was building. They talked about names and wondered whether they would have a son or daughter. Jack admitted he secretly hoped for a girl who would have Clara's hair and determination. Clara teased him that he just wanted someone else around to outnumber him, but secretly she hoped for a healthy child, boy or girl, who would grow up in this place they had built together. The baby came in late April of 1878, 2 days after Clara's 23rd birthday. Jack rode hard to fetch the midwife from the nearest homestead, then paced anxiously outside while the woman helped Clara through her labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Jack feared losing both his wife and child. But Clara was strong, and when he finally heard a baby's cry piercing the air, followed by the midwife's call that it was safe to enter, Jack rushed in to find Clara exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in the blanket they had shared that first night in the storm. "A son," she said softly, pulling back the blanket so Jack could see the tiny red face. "We have a son, Jack." Jack knelt beside the bed, looking at his son with wonder. The baby was so small, so perfect, with tiny fingers that wrapped around Jack's when he offered one. "He is beautiful," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are both beautiful. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for this gift." They named him Samuel after Clara's father, with the middle name Thomas after the reverend who had married them. Samuel Morrison came into the world healthy and strong-lunged, announcing his presence with enthusiastic crying whenever he was hungry or uncomfortable. Clara took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, though she admitted to Jack during those exhausting early weeks that she had never been so tired in her life. Jack helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Samuel when he fussed at night, changing soiled cloths, and taking over all the household chores so Clara could focus on feeding and caring for their son. He was a devoted father from the first moment, marveling at every tiny change, every new expression on Samuel's face. As spring turned to summer, life on the Morrison homestead settled into a new rhythm. The horse business continued to grow, and Jack hired a young man named Ben to help with the work so he could spend more time with Clara and Samuel. Clara's garden flourished, and she taught herself to manage the baby on her hip while she worked, something frontier women had been doing for generations. Samuel grew quickly, becoming a chubby, happy baby who smiled early and often. Jack would come in from the fields to find Clara singing to the baby while she worked, or later, playing with him on a blanket spread on the floor. The house that had seemed so spacious for two felt just right for three. When Samuel was 6 months old, Jack came to Clara with a proposition. "I have been thinking," he said, bouncing the baby on his knee while Clara kneaded bread dough, "about that first night when we met, about how close we came to not making it and how everything that has happened since stems from that moment." "I think about it too," Clara admitted. "Sometimes I wake up and cannot believe this is my life, that I have you and Samuel in this home. It seems too good to be real." "It is real," Jack assured her, "and I want to make sure we never forget where we came from, what we survived together." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I want to go back, to that place where we sheltered from the storm. I want to show Samuel when he is old enough, want him to know the story of how his parents met." Clara stopped kneading and looked at her husband, seeing the sentiment behind his practical words. "That is a long ride from here." "It is, but worth it, I think. We could go in the summer, camp along the way, make an adventure of it. What do you say?" Clara smiled, her heart full. "I say yes. Let us go back and remember where it all began." They made the journey the following summer, when Samuel was old enough to travel more easily. The ride took them south through country that was more settled now than it had been 3 years earlier, with towns springing up where there had only been wilderness. Clara rode with Samuel secured in a sling against her chest, while Jack led a pack-horse carrying their supplies. Finding the exact spot took time, as the landscape had changed and Jack's memory was not perfect. But after a day of searching, they found it. The rock outcropping that had sheltered them, still standing unchanged while everything else in their lives had transformed completely. It looked smaller than Clara remembered, less imposing but no less significant. They made camp there for the night, and after Samuel was asleep in his traveling cradle, Jack and Clara sat together at the mouth of the overhang, looking out at the stars that had witnessed the beginning of their love. Jack had brought something with him, and now he pulled it from his saddle bag, the leather cord he had tied around Clara's finger on their wedding day. "You kept it," Clara said, surprised. She had thought the cord still safely tucked in her keepsake box at home. I got it out before we left. I wanted to bring it back here to the place where everything started. Jack took Clara's hand, the one that now wore a proper gold band, and gently tied the leather cord around her wrist instead. We survived this place together, Clara. We chose each other when we had every reason not to trust, not to hope. I wanted to come back and honor that choice, that moment of faith we took. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she looked at the cord on her wrist, then at her husband's face in the starlight. I would choose you again, she whispered. Every time, in every storm, I would choose you. And I would choose you, Jack replied, pulling her close. Always. They sat there holding each other while the summer night sang around them. Two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something lasting from that desperate beginning. In the morning, they would pack up and return to their home, to their life and their son. But for this moment, they were simply Jack and Clara again, two strangers who had shared warmth against the killing cold and discovered love in the sharing. The years that followed were good ones for the Morrison family. The horse ranch prospered as Jack's reputation for quality and fairness spread throughout Montana territory. They added onto the house, building 2 more rooms to accommodate their growing family. A daughter, Anna, was born 2 years after Samuel, followed 3 years later by another son they named Matthew. The children grew up strong and healthy, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with the horses and the endless work of the ranch. Clara's Aunt Ruth visited regularly, professing each time to be shocked at how wild the children had gotten but clearly delighted by their energy and affection. She became Grandma Ruth to them, the closest thing to grandparents they would know since both Jack and Clara's parents were long gone. Ruth lived to see Samuel turn 12, Anna 10, and Matthew 7 before she passed peacefully in her sleep one winter night. She left her boarding house to Clara in her will, along with a letter expressing pride in the woman her niece had become and the family she had built. Clara cried for days after her aunt's death, mourning the loss of her last link to her parents and her childhood. Jack held her through the grief, understanding without needing words how much Ruth had meant to her. They sold the boarding house but kept some of Ruth's belongings, things that reminded Clara of the woman who had given them a chance when they were newlyweds with nothing but hope and determination. Samuel grew into a serious young man with his father's skill with horses and his mother's determination. He dreamed of expanding the ranch, of breeding the finest horses in Montana. Anna was bright and curious, constantly asking questions and demanding to be taught everything her brothers learned. Matthew was the adventurous one, always climbing too high, riding too fast, giving his parents equal amounts of pride and terror. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jack surprised Clara with a trip, just the two of them, leaving the children with trusted neighbors. He took her back to Silver Creek, to the small church where they had married. Reverend Thomas had passed on, but the church remained, still simple and welcoming. They renewed their vows there with no witnesses but themselves and the memory of what they had promised each other a decade before. "I love you more now than I did then," Clara told Jack as they stood before the altar. "I did not think that was possible, but it is true. Every day with you has been a gift. Every day with you has taught me what it means to be home," Jack replied. "You are my home, Clara. You and our children and the life we built. I thank God for that storm that brought you to me." They left the church hand in hand, no longer the desperate young people who had gambled on love, but partners who had proven that gamble worthwhile through a decade of shared work, shared joy, and shared challenges. They stayed that night in the same boarding house where they had spent their wedding night, in the same room if they could believe the proprietor's assurance. They made love with the practiced familiarity of long marriage, but also with the passion that had never quite faded, that still sparked between them when their eyes met across a room or when their hands touched in passing. The next day, they rode out to the rock outcropping one more time. It had been 8 years since their last visit, and Clara wondered if they would even find it again. But Jack's memory proved true, and there it was, unchanged and unchanging, waiting. They dismounted and walked into the shelter, and Clara was transported back to that terrifying night when she had been alone and freezing and certain she was going to die. "I was so scared," she said quietly, standing in the spot where she had first seen Jack crouched beside his struggling fire. "I had given up hope of finding shelter. I thought I was dead." "I was not much better off," Jack admitted. "Another few hours and I would have frozen despite the fire. You saved me as much as I saved you, Clara. We saved each other." Clara turned to face him, this man who had become her whole world. "Take my blanket," you said. "Do you remember? You were going to give me both blankets and face the cold alone." "Of course I remember, but you would not let me. You pulled me close and insisted we share." Jack smiled, pulling Clara into his arms. "Best decision either of us ever made." They stood there holding each other for a long time, remembering and honoring the moment that had changed both their lives. Then they mounted up and rode home to their children, their ranch, their life, carrying with them the renewed conviction that what they had built was worth every hardship, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. Montana Territory became the state of Montana in 1889, and the Morrisons celebrated along with their neighbors, feeling pride in the place they had helped to build. Jack was by then a respected figure in the community, known not just for his horses but for his fairness and his willingness to help neighbors in need. Clara had become the woman other women came to for advice, for help with difficult births, for comfort in hard times. The Morrison Ranch was known as a place where people were welcome, where hospitality was freely given. Samuel, grown now and 20 years old, announced his intention to marry a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sweet-faced young woman named Elizabeth who loved horses nearly as much as he did. Clara helped Elizabeth sew her wedding dress and hosted the celebration at the ranch, watching her eldest son make his own promises of forever and thinking about the twisting path that had led to this moment. If the storm had not come, if she had not found Jack's fire, if they had not chosen to trust each other, this young man would never have existed, and the world would have been poorer for it. Anna at 18 had become a schoolteacher, riding into the growing town of Morrison Creek, which had taken its name from the creek that ran through their land, 3 days a week to teach children their letters and numbers. She had inherited Clara's determination and Jack's patience, making her a natural teacher. She had suitors, but so far none had captured her interest enough to make her consider marriage. She had told Clara she was in no hurry, that she had seen what real love looked like in her parents and would not settle for less. Matthew at 15 was still the wild one, talking about joining a cattle drive or heading to Wyoming to work on the big ranches there. Clara worried about him, but Jack reminded her that boys needed to make their own way to test themselves against the world. "We will be here when he is ready to come home," Jack assured her, "but he needs to find his own path first." The 20th century arrived with celebration and speculation about what the new era would bring. The Morrisons were in their mid-40s now, no longer young but not yet old, with silver threading through Clara's hair and lines deepening around Jack's eyes. The ranch had grown to over 600 acres, with a reputation for quality horses that extended beyond Montana's borders. They had hired hands now, young men learning the trade, and a new barn that was twice the size of the original. On a cold November night in 1901, Jack woke Clara from sleep. "Come outside," he said quietly. "I want to show you something." Clara grumbled but allowed herself to be led outside into the freezing night. Jack wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and she understood what he was doing, what he was remembering. The stars overhead were brilliant, and a light snow was just beginning to fall, not the killing storm of their first meeting but a gentler reminder. 25 years ago, Jack said, holding her close beneath the blanket they shared. 25 years since a storm brought me the greatest gift of my life. 25 years since a stubborn cowboy refused to let me freeze, Clara replied, snuggling into his warmth, and insisted on sharing. You were the one who insisted on sharing, Jack corrected with a laugh. I was trying to be noble and give you both blankets, and I was trying to keep us both alive. Clara tilted her face up to kiss him. I love you, Jack Morrison. After all these years, through everything we have been through, I love you more than I can say. I love you too, Clara. You are still the fire I am drawn to, the warmth that keeps me going, the home I return to. Jack pulled her closer. Thank you for pulling me close all those years ago. Thank you for insisting we share. They stood there in the gentle snow, wrapped in each other and the memories of 25 years of partnership, and Clara thought about the girl she had been, lost and freezing and desperate. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this abundance of blessings. She could never have imagined that the worst night of her life would become the best, that terror would transform into joy, that a stranger's fire would light the way to forever. The years continued to roll forward, bringing changes as all years do. Samuel and Elizabeth had children, making Jack and Clara grandparents to twin boys who were as wild and wonderful as Matthew had been at their age. Anna finally met her match in a traveling doctor who came through town, and was charmed by the intelligent schoolteacher who could discuss philosophy and medicine with equal facility. Matthew did join a cattle drive but came home after 2 years, ready to settle down and help run the ranch that would one day be his. Jack's hair went white and his joints ached on cold mornings, but he still rose before dawn to check on the horses, still worked alongside his sons and the hired hands. Clara moved a little slower than she once had, but her mind remained sharp and her heart remained full. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, their 40th, each one a milestone that seemed impossible until it was upon them. In 1918, when the Great War in Europe was finally ending and the world was changing in ways neither of them could have predicted when they were young, Jack fell ill with the influenza that was sweeping the country. Clara nursed him through it with fierce determination, refusing to accept that after everything they had survived together, a sickness could take him from her. And Jack, stubborn as ever, recovered, though it took months before he regained his full strength. You are not allowed to leave me, Clara told him one night as he was finally well enough to sit up in bed. We have an agreement. We survived together, remember? I remember, Jack said, his voice still weak but his eyes clear and full of love. We share it, the good and the bad, until the very end. Until the very end, Clara agreed. They made it to their 50th wedding anniversary in 1926, a feat that seemed miraculous to them and everyone who knew their story. The celebration at the ranch was huge, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling the house that Jack and Clara had built with their own hands. Samuel ran the ranch now, with Matthew as his partner, and Anna's children were grown and starting families of their own. Reverend Johnson, who had taken over the church in Silver Creek after Reverend Thomas passed, came to renew their vows for a third time, though this time surrounded by family rather than alone. Jack stood a little straighter for the occasion, and Clara wore a dress that Anna had made for her, pale blue like the sky after a storm. I, Jack Morrison, take you, Clara Bennett Morrison, to be my wife for another 50 years, Jack said when asked to repeat his vows, making everyone laugh even as they wiped away tears. I, Clara Bennett Morrison, take you, Jack Morrison, to be my husband for as long as God grants us and beyond if he allows, Clara replied, her voice trembling but strong. They cut a cake that Anna had spent days decorating, and Samuel proposed a toast that traced the family's history from that stormy night in 1876 to this shining moment 50 years later. My parents taught us what love looks like, Samuel said, raising his glass. They taught us that real partnership means choosing each other every day, in good times and hard times, in wealth and poverty, in health and sickness. They taught us that the best things in life are worth fighting for, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the worst circumstances. Here is to 50 more years, though I think they have already earned their rest. No rest yet, Jack declared, pulling Clara close. We have grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren to meet. We have work yet to do. But the truth was that both of them were tired in a way that rest could not fix. They had lived full lives, built something lasting, seen their children grown and thriving. They had survived poverty and plenty, drought and flood, loss and joy. They had been partners for 50 years, friends and lovers, helpmates and confidants, everything to each other. On a cold night in late November 1927, almost exactly 51 years after they had first met, Jack woke Clara in the night. "I am cold," he said simply. Clara immediately moved closer, wrapping her arms around him just as she had that first night. "We share it," she whispered, holding him tight. "We keep each other warm." "Always," Jack agreed, his arms coming around her. "Always, my Clara." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and in the morning when the family came to check on them, they found them still holding each other, both having passed peacefully in the night. The doctor said it was their hearts, worn out from long lives well lived, but the family knew better. Jack and Clara Morrison had simply kept their promise to the end. They had shared everything, the blankets and the warmth, the struggles and the triumphs, and when it was time to leave this life, they had done that together too. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a headstone that read, "Jack and Clara Morrison, partners in life and love, together from the first storm to the last." Samuel made sure there was a blanket carved into the stone, a reminder of the moment that had started everything. The ranch continued under Samuel and Matthew's management, then passed to the next generation and the next. The story of how Jack and Clara met became family legend, told to each new child as they grew old enough to understand. The leather cord that had been Clara's first wedding ring was preserved in a frame, hung in the main house where everyone could see it. And every November, on the anniversary of that first meeting, the family would gather at the gravesite to remember and honor the love that had created them all. The rock outcropping where Jack and Clara had sheltered became something of a family shrine. Generations of Morrisons made pilgrimages there, camping beneath the overhang and trying to imagine what it must have been like for their ancestors on that desperate night. Young couples in the family began a tradition of spending a night there before their weddings, a way of honoring the legacy of Jack and Clara, of acknowledging that true love often comes from unexpected places and requires courage to embrace. The story spread beyond the family. Writers came to interview the Morrison descendants, wanting to hear about the cowboy and the lost woman who had found each other in a blizzard. Books were written, and later, when such things became possible, films were made, though the family always said they could never quite capture the truth of it, the desperate fear and the leap of faith, the frost and the warmth, the decision to share rather than face the darkness alone. But in the end, it was not the drama of that first night that mattered most. It was what came after. It was 51 years of partnership, of choosing each other day after day, of building a life and a family from nothing but determination and love. It was the example they set for everyone who came after, showing that real love was not just a feeling but a series of actions, a commitment honored in big moments and small. On the 100th anniversary of their meeting, in 1976, the family gathered once more at the rock outcropping. There were dozens of them now, Morrisons scattered across the country but drawn back to Montana for this occasion. The eldest among them was Samuel's daughter, 98 years old, who had been 5 when Jack and Clara died and still remembered them clearly. They were magic together, she told the assembled family, her voice wavering but clear. Not fairy tale magic, but something real. You could see it in how they looked at each other, how they moved together like two parts of one whole. Grandpa would come in from the fields and Grandma's face would light up like it was the first time she had seen him. And Grandpa, no matter how tired he was, always had a kiss for her, always had a moment to ask about her day. They made love look easy, but I know now it was not. It was work and choice and commitment. But they made it look easy because they never wavered, never doubted, never stopped choosing each other. The family spent that weekend camped around the outcropping, sharing stories and memories, reinforcing bonds, and remembering the couple who had started it all. When they finally packed up to leave, they left flowers on the spot where Jack's fire had burned, a small tribute to the warmth that had saved 2 lives and created so many more. The Morrison Ranch still operates today, though much has changed from Jack and Clara's time. The horses are bred for showing now as much as working, and the ranch has diversified into other ventures. But the heart of it remains the same, a family business built on integrity and hard work, on the values Jack and Clara instilled in their children and their children's children. And somewhere in the main house, carefully preserved and protected, is that leather cord, that simple piece of leather that was the first physical symbol of a promise that would shape generations. Beside it hangs a photograph, one of the few taken of Jack and Clara, shot at their 40th anniversary. In it, they are old, white-haired, weathered by decades of Montana sun and wind. But they are standing close together, his arm around her waist, her hand on his chest, and they are looking at each other rather than the camera. And in their eyes, clear even in the faded photograph, is everything that matters: love, trust, partnership, joy. The story of Jack and Clara Morrison is ultimately a simple one. A cowboy and a lost woman, a blizzard and a dying fire, a moment of choice that became a lifetime of love. But in that simplicity lies something profound, a reminder that the greatest adventures often begin with the smallest acts of kindness, that love can grow in the harshest conditions, and that sometimes, when the frost threatens to steal everything, the answer is not to face it alone but to pull close and share the warmth, to trust in another person and in the possibility of surviving together. "Take my blanket," the cowboy said through frost, offering everything he had to save a stranger. "We share it," she replied, refusing to let either of them face the darkness alone. And in that sharing, in that moment of connection and trust and desperate hope, they found not just survival but something far more precious. They found each other, and in finding each other they found home. The end of their story is not sad, though they are long gone now. It is triumphant, a testimony to what is possible when 2 people choose love over fear, together over alone, hope over despair. Jack and Clara Morrison lived and loved and built something that outlasted them by generations. They faced the frost and survived not by individual strength, but by shared warmth, by the simple human act of holding each other through the darkest hours and refusing to let go. And that, in the end, is the only story that matters. Not the dramatic beginning, though that was remarkable. Not the successful ranch or the children or the years of prosperity, though those were blessings beyond measure. The story that matters is the one told in every moment between that first night and the last, the story of 2 people who kept choosing each other, who kept sharing the blanket, who kept the warmth alive between them until the very end. In the hills of Montana, a creek still runs through land that once belonged to Jack and Clara Morrison. Horses graze in fields they cleared with their own hands. Their descendants still gather to remember and celebrate the love that made them all possible. And on cold nights when the wind blows down from the mountains and frost threatens the land, someone in the family will invariably tell the story again, the legend that never gets old. How a cowboy offered his blanket to a freezing stranger, how she refused to take it and insisted they share, and how that simple act of sharing created a love story that would echo through generations, a beacon of hope and warmth against the endless cold.